Okay, well, we've been focusing on the plans by the BRIC countries to shift some of their foreign reserves into I.M.F. bonds. This has some worried about countries moving away from U.S. treasuries, but some fixed income analysts say the concerns are overblown.
A lot of the inflation concerns are a little bit far-fetched given how early in the cycle we are in the recovery. So I think given the backup in rates, we've seen value players show interest at these auctions.
Well, for more on treasuries and the BRIC nations, we're joined by Daniel Tenengauzer. He's the head of foreign exchange and emerging market debt strategy at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And Daniel, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, so the BRIC countries, they want more clout in this world economy. They're buying I.M.F. bonds. Is it going to work?
Yeah, there are three aspects of this. The first one is they do want that clout, and that definitely puts them in the headlines, which is great. I think that they should have a stronger say in what's happening around the I.M.F. and where the funds go. The other two topics are actually quite negative in the sense that the main currency used by the fund is the so-called SDR, which is
special drawing rights.
Exactly, which a key chunk of that is still dollars. So even though there is this sense that they might be diversifying out of dollars, we're still talking about 41% of the SDRs that are U.S. dollar denominated. And number three is the amount of those bonds. Again, we're talking about BRIC countries holding $2.8 trillion of reserves, and we're talking here about issuance potentially of about $100 to $150 billion of those bonds. We are not quite there yet. I'm not too sure if the market can absorb that. So again, it's not a significant amount to make really a big difference.
Right, so it's just really a fraction of what they hold at this point. So
that's correct.
So does that mean, Daniel, that you see these concerns as overblown, essentially?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, because also part of it is that, I mean, why would these BRIC countries want to devalue, or I suppose undercut their treasury holdings at this point, right? I mean, they're so locked in that if they undercut them, I mean, they would essentially be jeopardizing their own economic growth, right?
Exactly. It's a huge, enormous amount of assets that are basically being managed by some key portfolio managers out there that are extremely risk averse. Central banks accumulate reserves to keep foreign exchange market stability. They are not doing that necessarily for profit taking. So there is a number of objectives that they try to do once they accumulate those reserves, and one of them, again, currency stability, given that they would be very careful about the assets they hold. So all the process is very, very gradual. And as a result, yes, they are interested in diversifying into other currencies, but they don't want to jeopardize all their holdings, which are, broadly speaking, US dollar denominated.
But regardless, though, it appears to me that the fact that there is this debate going on right now on the global stage tells me that something is turning, right? The tide is turning, at least in terms of questions about the dollar, but also questions about U.S. debt.
That's correct. Two things here. First is, yes, the tide is turning, and it should turn, okay, because there is a significant number of countries out there that are growing, and per capita GDP in those countries is reaching a certain threshold that would warrant them to diversify into other currencies. But the other problem is that it's a two-way street. You can't ask for an alternative to the dollar without offering that alternative. And the truth is that today there are probably the only two very meaningful alternatives for the U.S. dollar as reserve currencies, the Japanese yen and the euro.
Our earlier guest had talked about the renminbi.
Yeah, but the problem is that, again, nobody can buy the renminbi. Those are non-deliverable currencies. Between the four BRICs, all four BRICs are non-deliverable. You cannot buy those currencies in open markets, which means that it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg. Let's try to have alternatives to the dollar, but we're not offering those alternatives ourselves.
Right, and Paul Volcker was saying essentially there's no alternative at this point. But in the time that we have, though, Daniel, I mean, tell me, essentially, what do you think the BRIC countries, though, what are they trying to get out of the U.S. at this point? Because they're pretty much stuck between a rock and a hard place. But what are they trying to get from the Fed and from the Treasury? I
think at this point, what they really want is a much stronger say in the I.M.F. This is really the key thing. They, I don't think they understand. I think they understand the difficulties of transitioning out of the dollar as a global reserve currency. That is well said and known by everybody. The key thing really is a much stronger say in the IMF. The U.S. is still the largest stakeholder in the IMF, and the BRICS countries want a stronger say there.
Indeed. Okay, and they're doing this through these actions.
Exactly.
All right, Daniel, thanks so much for joining us and putting all of that in perspective for us. Daniel Tenengauzer, head of foreign exchange and emerging market debt strategy at Bank of America Merrill Lynch.